I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. This is Top Gun Maverick.
Yes. Like the original Top Gun to Top Gun sequel, there was an unusual long gap between the recording of these episodes.
That's not our fault, though.
Yes.
We recorded the original episode, which is, you've already probably have listened to. It's already out on the podcast. Back in, what was it, like May of 2020?
Something like that, yeah.
We had both recently, coincidentally, watched the movie, so we recorded about it in anticipation of the forthcoming sequel, which then was delayed by nearly 2 years.
Yeah.
What, just about a 6-8 weeks short of 2 years?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So we are just minutes from having watched this movie.
Yeah.
We drove from the theater to Nate's apartment, and we are now recording. Nate, first reactions.
First reactions to Top Gun. Is that a spoiler to have me react to it first?
No, I can go first if you want.
Yeah, go ahead and you go first.
For me, it worked. One of the critics that I heard talk about this movie said, don't overthink it. Don't put a lot of thought into it. Just go and enjoy yourself.
That's good advice. Tom Cruise even gives it.
It's great advice. Mm-hmm. I actually, in preparation for this, because it had been 2 years since I'd watched Top Gun, I rewatched Top Gun yesterday just in case there was any connecting threads that I might miss or something. And there's really not very many connecting threads. It
stands on its own.
Yeah, it does. It stands on its own. There's plot elements like knowing that
who Goose
Rooster, knowing who Goose is, that Rooster is his son, knowing a little bit of Maverick's history, who Tom Cruise's character is. Outside of that, you don't really need to know anything else coming into this. There are a few things that are nice with Iceman, Kane, a couple of those characters, but it's not necessary. Just go into it with an open mind, ready to have fun. But for me, it worked.
Yeah. I would say that it is everything it needed to be and a little bit more. I was kind of expecting it to end with the mission, and I was completely open to the idea, I'm going to spoil it, that that Maverick would sacrifice himself.
Which he did.
Which he did, but I thought, it'll be the end of him.
Yeah.
But no, they have that whole rescue sequence that gets kind of 80s.
Yeah.
It's just kind of over the top, and the tone changes a bit, but it works. Like, it's the cherry on top of the movie.
It's also like the area where like the suspension of disbelief in watching a movie has to kick in.
Yeah, it does. You're switching your disbelief gears up when you go into that segment of the movie.
The plausibility becomes pretty slim. It's one of those things where like there's the one in 100,000 chance it could work, and so we're gonna go with it.
Yeah.
But as long as you go into it knowing what this movie is and just ready, not to overthink it, it's fine. It works.
What is the basic plot of Top Gun Maverick?
So Top Gun Maverick, it starts off with this new hypersonic jet that they're testing that they need to get to Mach 10, and Tom Cruise is doing what he has done his entire career of defying orders and pissing people off. He, of course, gets to Mach 10, but he's not satisfied with that. He has to push it, and, of course, the plane explodes.
Which leads to one of the funnier scenes in the movie when he crashes and he's in his flight suit and he wanders into this country western cafe that feels like it's out of a different decade, to all of the cowboy types in there like, "Ooh, our mouths are ajar. Who is this guy?" And he asks, "Where am I?" And the little boy goes, "Earth."
Yeah.
That was audience like that.
So, of course, Tom Cruise is reassigned and he's in trouble, but he's sent back to the Top Gun school. And he's told this mission, there's this thing, I don't think it's openly said, but it's basically North Korea.
It's unspecified nation.
Just like the first movie. Mm-hmm. But it's basically North Korea has a nuclear facility that is about to come online and needs to be stopped. So his assigned mission is to train. He sent 12 former top graduates of Top Gun, and he has to train them on this mission to blow up the facility and then pick the crew. That's his assignment. And he isn't very satisfied with the assignment because he wants to be the person on the crew. Mm-hmm. But he's also proving to them that he's right in that he has to train them the way he's training them, because he has to prove to them that they're not the best, because that's what they've been told their whole careers.
And they'd be too cocky to do the mission if they're overconfident.
Yeah. And, and he's training them, but of course Rooster, who is Goose's son, is one of the pilots that's there. And they don't have a good relationship because Tom Cruise prevented him from joining the flight academy, when he wanted to. He pulled his application, which they tell us it means it took him 4 years longer to get to that point in his career than it otherwise would have. Mm-hmm. So he resents Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is Maverick. But we learned that Tom Cruise did that because his mother asked him to before she died.
And the mother was...
Meg Ryan.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But that means that before he's really gotten much into his adulthood, he's lost his father and his mother, which is unfortunate.
Because Meg Ryan asked Tom Cruise, don't let my son get into the flight school.
Yeah, well, she didn't want him to be a pilot, period, but he could only do so much. But Tom Cruise, as he tells us at one point in the movie, like his girlfriend, Penny, played by Jennifer Connelly.
Who is not Charlie from the original movie. We weren't immediately sure because there's a lot of similarities between these characters.
Yeah. She asked him at one point why he did that, and he explains, and she says, well, did you ever tell him that? And he goes, no. He already resented me. Why does he need to resent his mom, too? Tough choice, an interesting choice. But he's training these pilots, and then the mission has to get moved up. John Hamm's character, Admiral Cyclone Simpson, changes the mission parameters after they've been training for weeks on this 2.5 minute time to pull off the mission. He changes the approach, increases the time to 4 minutes, basically means that it's almost guaranteed someone's going to die. But they haven't been able to execute the mission as designed. Tom Cruise, the Iceman, we learn, Val Kilmer's Iceman, is now not just an admiral, but he is Commander Pacific Fleet, which is a very prestigious position in the Navy. I believe the appropriate abbreviation of that is COMPAC.
Okay.
But anyways, he's been protecting Tom Cruise throughout his career.
Which is why Tom Cruise is, the
Maverick character throughout his career.
He's only a captain, even though it's 2020. Not 1986.
Yeah. And everyone keeps saying he should have been an admiral by now.
Or even a senator.
Yeah. But because he keeps screwing up, he's never advanced past captain. He makes a passing comment about I'm where I'm supposed to be. But Val Kilmer's Iceman passes away during the course of the movie, so Tom Cruise is no longer protected. He's kicked off the mission, and that's when they try to change the parameters of the mission. And Tom Cruise basically goes and steals his own fighter plane and flies the mission in less time than he's been giving these students. They've been given 2.5 minutes to fly this flight run and do a bombing mission. And he goes, nobody's been able to do it in under, was it like 3.5 or 4 minutes?
Like that, yeah.
And so he goes and does it in 2 minutes and 15 seconds just to prove that it's possible. Though we're told that he, in doing so, he may have damaged his plane beyond...
It may never fly again.
Yeah, it may never be flight worthy again. But he pulled it off. So, of course, now he's the leader of the mission.
Yeah, it puts John Hamm in this position where it's like, well, I have enough to get you dishonorably discharged, but then the mission will probably fail, or I can risk my career and have you lead it.
Yeah.
And he opts for the latter.
Yep. So they put this together. They go fly the mission. Of course, we're told that 2 miracles have to occur. Basically, 3 miracles have to occur to get everyone back. The first is hitting the first bomb to open the path for the second bomb, which is also basically its own impossible thing because it's just such a challenging flight path to get to. And then the escape is its own third miracle. Is basically what we're told going into this. But, of course, because it's a movie, they pull off the bombing missions, the first 2 miracles. And then backing up, Rooster has ran out of flares. A couple more surface-to-air missiles have been launched at him. And Tom Cruise's Maverick flies between Rooster and the surface-to-air missiles, defeating one of the missiles that's going for Rooster and getting hit with a subsequent missile himself. His plane crashes, and everyone else is ordered back to the carrier. And, of course, Rooster ignores the orders and goes and shoots down the helicopter that's on its way to kill Maverick. But in doing so, exposes himself to the surface-to-air missiles again, is shot down. And then Tom Cruise and Rooster reunite on the ground, where they hike across the mountain.
What are you doing here? You should be free. I sacrificed my life to save you. Well, I saved your life, because he did save his life from a helicopter attack when he was crashed on the ground. And then
he says, what were you thinking?
What were you thinking? You told me not to think.
He's just kind of like, well, crap.
Because that's his thing. It's like you can't think. You have to know. You have to kind of do muscle memory, do it by instinct. Yeah.
Well, and I thought it was kind of funny because in that moment it's that like uncle moment that you have where like you've been telling your niece or nephew something or playing a prank on them and all of a sudden they turn around on you and you're like, crap, I can't even get mad at them. But they hike across the mountain to the Sayre Field, which has previously been struck with Tomahawk missiles in preparation for their mission and to prevent other more advanced fighters from coming to intercept them because they have to fly it in the F-18 because it's the only one that can fly the profile, but it's not advanced enough to take on the enemy aircraft. But they go to this air base, and we're told that at this air base they also have myriad ancient aircraft.
Surplus stuff that they got.
Yeah, and so they run back to the base and discover there's an F-14 Tomcat. And of course, on first attempt, everything works to fire up the engines, and they use a taxiway to take off, and are trying to make their way back to the boat when they're intercepted by some enemy fighter jets, more advanced fighter jets. But through, as Tom Cruise's Maverick tells us consistently throughout the mission, or throughout the movie, it's not the plane, it's the pilot. So, of course, he just outflies the other pilots and is able to shoot down 2 of the enemy fighters who have been in the area already. And as they're making their way back to the carrier, they're intercepted by a 3rd fighter, get in a dogfight, which they are losing and about to lose, when the spare plane on the tarmac or the carrier deck, piloted by
Glenn Powell's Lieutenant Jake Hangman Sorensen,
comes in, of course, shoots down the enemy plane who wasn't expecting him, and they're all able to return to the carrier. Tom Cruise, though, in takeoff has damaged landing gear, so he has to make a crash landing in the F-14. But, of course, they make the safe crash landing on the deck, and the movie, and well,
then you have resolution to the romantic subplot
Yeah.
between Jennifer Connelly and Tom Cruise, and finish the reconciliation between Miles Teller's Rooster and Maverick.
Yeah. And the main issue there is basically that it's basically Maverick acknowledging that this is the end of his career. He has to move on. And so instead of just ending with him crashing on the deck of the carrier, they give him a love interest that he's able to reunite with.
Yeah, they
and
have
move
something
on.
to live for when his career is over.
So
I wanted to talk a little bit about the cast, or at least some of it. So obviously Tom Cruise is a given. His love interest in the original film was Charlie, played by Kelly McGillis. But as I think I said before, these are very similar characters. Jennifer Connelly's Penny. They've known each other for a long time. They're ex-lovers. They get back together. She runs the bar from the first one. I guess she worked there and then eventually bought the bar. She has a similar car to Kelly McGillis, lives in a similar house to Kelly McGillis. And I think that the main reason why they cast Jennifer Connelly other than Kelly McGillis, and the 2 secondary reasons are, I don't think Kelly McGillis has worked in a while, and Jennifer Connelly's more of a name to put on your movie. But I think the principal reason is because Kelly McGillis has aged like a normal human being, and Tom Cruise has not. And the disparity there would probably fill off.
You know, having rewatched Top Gun yesterday, you can see some age difference in Tom Cruise, though just not as much as you would expect.
So Tom Cruise was born in 1962, I think. And Kelly McGillis was born in 1957. And Jennifer Connelly was born in 1970. So that is a 12, 13-year age difference between love interests. And Jennifer Connelly looks fantastic in this movie.
Absolutely.
You've got, of course, Miles Teller.
Who does look remarkably
He does.
like...
They get, especially with the mustache.
Yeah.
I'm kind of middling on Miles Teller, but he was suitable for this part.
Yeah.
And then there's the Val Kilmer extended cameo sequence. You see pictures of him. You see text conversations between Tom Cruise and him. But then they have this scene where he's called in to the Admiral's home. Tom Cruise has a little conversation with his wife. It's like the cancer's back or whatever it is that he has his back, and it's hard for him to talk. So he goes into his office and he communicates principally through a computer. He does say a few words towards the end of the conversation. I've seen things about how grateful Val Kilmer was that Tom Cruise kind of made this scene happen, because obviously he's been not able to act for a while. He's had a tracheotomy.
Yeah.
And is not in great health, and they were able to work around it. It's the kind of thing that could seem hokey and forced, but I thought it really worked here. It's a sweet moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, everything in this movie was just executed well. Like,
Yeah.
That's the thing that I think is most remarkable is everything that could have been hokey and things like you said, they just struck the right chord. And I don't know how much editing or iterations they had to go through to get there, but they just managed to strike the right chord.
And the longer they waited, because this movie is from the Reagan administration, the longer they waited, kind of the more anticipation and build up that you had to this, because there was always a market for a sequel. They could have made a sequel the next year if they had wanted to. But you have to justify making the sequel and to have the story right and to get that balance where it homages the original, but it's its own thing, and kind of acknowledging time. I thought the Maverick character was a more conflicted character than I remember him being in the original one, which makes sense, for the decades that have passed.
Yeah.
I thought that really worked. Notable in the supporting cast is the return of Charles Parnell. He was in the first one, right? He was Warlock. They made it sound like he was a character.
I believe he was, yeah.
Oh, okay. And then you've got younger ones like Monica Barbeau as Phoenix, Jay Ellis as Payback, Louis Pullman as Bob, and of course Glenn Powell as Hangman. He occupies a space similar to what Val Kilmer occupied in the original one. He's kind of the provocative, kind of a little bit of a jerk, but he comes around. And then the use of John Hamm as the person in charge of the mission and in charge of the Top Gun program, I thought worked. I think John Hamm has had an interesting career trajectory. Like, you look at him and you're like, leading man. And he's never really been a leading man, but he's a good working kind of a character actor, even though he's got this very chiseled look.
Well, that's what gives him some versatility and what makes him work in this role. Has the ability to be just stern enough and has just enough of a chiseled look to be able to pull off that admiral role.
And I was a little surprised when Don Draper fired Maverick. After what happened to Lane Price. I mean, you'd think, but it worked out.
There you go.
It's an all on the page kind of, all on the screen kind of movie. There's really not a lot of depth to it. There's not really a lot to plunge into.
No, and there's not too much to overanalyze.
Nor should there
be. The other thing, you were talking about how long it took to make this sequel, and the other thought that occurred to me related to that was, I think also part of the reason why it took so long to make this sequel was navigating the various technologies. And Tom Cruise has been well known that for this remake, he insisted on practical effects. He didn't want the flight sequences to be CGI. And he insisted on his co-stars had to go through some training and had to be able to handle some of the G stuff that they do so that they could do practical shots.
And it needed to be, because this movie would be bad if it were CGI.
Well, but they also had to get special permission from the Navy to do certain things. Like, there are some of those ceiling things they talk about, the altitudes that they're allowed to fly at. He had to get special permission from the Navy to do low-level passes. Like, they had to get permission to fly at 60 feet off the ground at 480 knots, basically 500 miles an hour, which is not something the Navy had ever allowed anyone to do previously, or supposedly. But they got permission to do a lot of things. I don't know what the arrangements are on using the jets for various things and who flies what and whatnot, but I know they had to pay for the use of the jets, and it's basically just considered training missions for the Navy personnel involved. But
it also works like the first Top Gun movie works as a kind of a soft propaganda film.
Yes. Yeah, a recruiting tool or something like that. But, it worked, and I'm glad that we primarily are sticking with practical effects in this, because I don't know that it would have worked with CGI.
And I'm glad we saw it on the IMAX screen.
Yes.
Which was a film to see on
which was my choice.
Possible, yeah.
And it was from one of the other movie podcasts I listened to, and it was their recommendation. They said, just go and see it on the best screen you can go see it on. And it worked. Having it on IMAX, having it be that a little bit more all-consuming, maybe that's part of why it worked so well for us. But I suspect that any big screen this really works on. So
yeah, I mean, it's an achievement. I'm impressed that they pulled this off.
What's the other achievement of this movie so far, Nate?
I don't know.
Yes, you do.
What?
Tom Cruise's first $100 million opening.
Oh, yes. This film, which has a listed budget of $170 million, has made over $500 million, $500 million in the 10 days it's been out?
Something like that. Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
This is the biggest opening of Tom Cruise's career.
Its opening weekend in the U.S. and Canada brought in $126.7 million.
Wow.
So it almost recouped its budget just on its opening weekend. Yeah. Worldwide gross figures are being updated because we are recording this on the weekend, so those are still coming in.
Now, the second weekend of its release.
Yeah. Let's see what trivia is out there for this. The World War II P-51 Mustang seen in this movie is actually Tom Cruise's own airplane, and he is an accomplished pilot in real life.
What was funny about that opening sequence where Tom Cruise basically lives in a hangar and he gets up and he's like reading the paper, he's eating, and then he's doing mechanical stuff on the plane, and later they're doing tests on him with the little nods to read his heart rate and like all this stuff that he's doing in this. I imagine Tom Cruise does it his regular life.
Yeah.
Like they could have just come on a weekend. It's like, well, what are you doing this weekend?
Well, did you see the clip with James Corden where Tom Cruise, he goes and flies with Tom Cruise?
I did not.
So Tom Cruise takes him up in his P-51 Mustang.
Oh.
And it's kind of funny because he's going through like the emergency procedures, and of course he's making it more dramatic for TV. But he says if an engine goes out, I'll open the canopy, you'll unstrap yourself, and I'll turn the plane upside down, and you'll fall out. And he's strapped in with the parachute or whatever. And James Corden is reacting not very thrilled to that prospect, and he goes, "Well, how many engines do we have?" And he goes, "Well, one." It's like, well, so if the engine goes out, but then they actually take him in it's essentially the same thing as the fighter jets they're using in the movies, but a civilian version, and he actually takes him flying in a jet and is pulling a few G's and basically gets James Corden just short of the point where he's about to throw up, and then they land the plane. It's a clip on YouTube. It's probably worth watching. It is pretty funny.
That's how a lot of people react to James Corden generally, just short of the point where you're going to throw up.
Yeah, I would say it's worth watching. You should go check it out. So, according to Miles Teller, 3 of the 6 new actors threw up every day of filming in the jets, which would not surprise me. The cast apparently, according to Miles Teller, got to choose their own call signs, and he chose Rooster because it was in the same family as Goose.
Mine would be esoteric, so I could have an esoteric call sign.
Well, how did the one guy choose Bob if they got to pick their own name?
It's not very creative.
Yeah. At the insistence of Tom Cruise, there was minimal green screen and CGI aerial shots in the film, and even the close-up cockpit shots are taken during real in-flight sequences. This meant that much of the cast had to undergo extensive G-force training sessions to withstand the physical demands of the G-force's pressures during flights. That would have been kind of cool to if you were somebody in this cast to go and do all of that stuff with Tom Cruise and then flying the jets, and yeah. The actors who were playing pilots in this film not only had to film themselves, which meant turning the camera on and off, they also had to touch up their own makeup, adjust their lighting, and handle their own sound.
Wow.
The director had to wait on the ground for hours sometimes for the actors to come back with the footage.
Wow.
Adjustments would be made after viewing the footage, and then the actors would have to go back up for another take.
I assume somebody else was flying.
Yeah, Navy pilots would be flying. They'd be in the back seat.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tom Cruise's involvement in this movie was predicated on the condition that real aircraft be used in aerial sequences and not CGI. And it's the right move to make. This would not have worked had Tom Cruise not been in it. And I don't think it would have worked if it wasn't real plane shots.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
There would have been no point otherwise.
Dedicated to the memory of the original Top Gun director, Tony Scott, who was in the process of developing a version of this sequel before he died.
One of the longest time, 36 years, between a film and its sequel in the movie history.
So Tom Cruise is now older than Tom Skerritt was when he played Viper in the original Top Gun. For those of you who are naval fans, the aircraft carrier used in the movie is the USS Theodore Roosevelt.
The roof of the shack next to Ed Harris wasn't supposed to be lifted when Maverick flies past. However, they only had one chance to shoot it, so it was kept in the film. And I actually liked that.
I wondered about that, and part of me was like, oh, that was cool, and part of me was like, that was cheesy. So I wonder if that just really happened when they flew over it.
Apparently.
Yeah. The Navy's oldest fighter pilot retired at 54. Calculating from Maverick's birth in 1962, he is 58 in Top Gun Maverick, pushing the envelope, as pilots say. On the Kermode and Mayo podcast, Miles Teller says that they shot more footage for this film than the runtime of the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Wow.
That's crazy. And I'm going to have to look that podcast up because I listened to a previous Mark Kermode podcast, and he has been referenced quite heavily in our...
Podcast.
No. Exorcist podcast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Shot entirely on IMAX-certified Sony Venice 6K full-frame cameras. especially developed for the film in order to shoot the cockpit experience. So maybe consider going and seeing this on IMAX since it was filmed for it. Here's our connection to the Jennifer Connelly Penny character. Jennifer Connelly has been cast as Penny Benjamin. In the original Top Gun, that character is referenced by Goose as being the daughter of an admiral that Maverick had dated. As of the 1986 version, Connelly was a minor aged 16. Connelly is 8 years younger than Tom Cruise.
Dude.
So that would explain also why he got in trouble for dating the admiral's daughter. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's all that's worth putting on this. But yeah, fun movie. I would say it's worth your time to go watch it. Nate, how would you rate this movie?
I would rate it 3 stars. It's kind of the epitome of a 3-star crowd-pleasing movie.
As was the original.
And I thought for much of the movie I was going to give it 7, but I think I'll round it up to 8. Because it is, I mean, it's, for what it is, I don't see how you make it better than what it is.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think 3, I mean, like you said, on the 4-star scale, this is the epitome of the 3-star movie, especially your summer blockbuster. I was also kind of torn, 7, 7.5, 8. But again, like you said, I can't see what you would do better in this sequel. So I'll be with you, and I'll also go 8 stars on the 10-star scale. Interestingly enough, this has an 8.7 star rating on IMDb as of right now with 95,000 ratings. So, which the original Top Gun only gets 6.9 star aggregate score on IMDb.
The movie has a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I'm surprised it's that high. I mean, it's good, but I'm just surprised 97%. Yeah. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Recorded Podcast. I'm Rob. Actually, I should glance at where the levels are. Testing. Yeah, we were good.
We're good.
What outtakes you got for us?
Brought to you by the U.S. Navy.
You're going to continue the product placement, huh?
I guess so. It's becoming
U.S. Navy is the product in this one?
Pretty much.
Brought to you by... No, there's not really anything else. That, I mean, so this had, shadows of... what's the Owen Wilson one where he's the pilot that crashes behind enemy lines? Mm-hmm. Has, that moment on the ground has shadows of behind enemy lines. It's got, obviously, homages to the original Top Gun. Yeah, it has a few homages in it. I was quite surprised by that ground sequence.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. And, of course, we saw the trailer for the next Mission Impossible.
Oh, yes.
And at one point, I was thinking to myself, I was like, why is Tom Cruise making all these movies right now? It's not like he really needs the money. Sure, Scientology could use some more money or whatnot. But then I started thinking about it, and I was like, look at the crap he gets to do in his movies. No wonder he's still making movies.
And he's, like I was thinking, who else from the 80s would you still build a big action film around? Now, you've got someone like Sylvester Stallone and does these emeritus kind of lower budget things, but he is as big a star now as he was 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Which is unheard of post the studio system.
Well, he just pumps out crowd pleasers.
Yeah.
I mean,
and he manages to maintain a certain level of quality.
Well, and I think a certain amount of that comes back to his insistence on getting involved in some of the stunts, and that it requires a certain amount of authenticity to it at that point.
He won't do it if they're not going to go all out for it.
I mean, and he's only making big budget movies. What did you say the budget for this was? $170 million. $170 million. How much of that is going to him?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there has to be $100 million.
Could be 30, $40 million.
I mean, I'm assuming there has to be roughly $100 million spent on the planes. Mm-hmm. Fuel, time, pilots, everything. I don't know. Who knows? But, I mean, point being that Tom Cruise has to be pulling down a sizable paycheck in these.
Yeah.
But if you are and they're willing to commit the budget to you, why wouldn't you?
If you can, do.
Yeah.